customer perception to them is reality. If they're not happy, yes, maybe we should be doing something about it. In some cases, happiness is fleeting and business outcomes are long lasting. Happiness is certainly not the primary objective of a customer success department.
Very Gordon Gekko-esque of you. Happiness is fleeting, but business outcomes are forever. You sound like a corporate raider. All right. Hi there, folks, and thank you for joining us. You're listening to Lifetime Value, the customer success podcast, where we help you wrap up the week that was in customer success and start you off on the right foot for the one ahead of you. I am your host, the Aubrey Graham of Customer Success Podcast. My name is Dillon Young, and this week's guest of honor is currently serving as a customer success manager at Coveo, where she is going to tell me whether I pronounce that correctly. She is heavily involved in committees that include the 1% Time Pledge and the Professional Women's Network. She currently serves as a board member for the St. Clair College Alumni Association and is obtaining her MBA with a specialization in data analytics from the University of Fredericton. Today we have Sara LaBlance with us. Sara.
There we go. 1 out of 2 pronunciations correct. So
Okay. Well, how do you pronounce your employer's name?
Coveo.
Oh, come on.
I know, it's close, very close.
Where are they based? Is that?
Yeah, it's so I'm based in Canada, southwestern Ontario specifically, but it was founded in Quebec, so French speaking.
There it is.
So we have offices in Quebec City, Montreal, and then London, England as well. So
very cool. And what does Coveo do?
yeah, so it's enterprise search. So it's artificial intelligence powered with different machine learning models.
What does that mean? Enterprise search. Like what
Yeah.
problem are you solving?
So we have a couple different lines of business. One of them being service, which would focus on self-service and communities. So searching for content and being able to find it quickly, as well as case deflection. So actually providing those results that you see when you start inputting case information, and being able to find a resolution before actually submitting a case. With websites and e-commerce, of course, we're helping people find products. We also do internal use cases for intranet use cases to improve productivity for employees.
Interesting. Is it its own standalone product, or does it underpin other search functions?
Yeah, so it integrates seamlessly into websites. So you would never really know when you go from a
Got it.
website to a Coveo instance. But that search box on front-facing websites, for example, would start leveraging our machine learning models.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So how long have you been with Coveo?
Coming up on a year in April, so just finally figuring out what's going on. The product's very technical, so it's been quite the learning curve, but I feel like I've got it most days.
Let's take a step back and why don't you tell me what it is you're passionate about within the customer success space?
Yeah, so I, like most people, got into customer success completely by accident. I started in marketing, and the thing that kind of drove me towards marketing was big data and data
Mm.
analysis. And in February 2020, I lost my job. They eliminated the sales and marketing department in that organization, and I went for an interview for a marketing role at a tech company. And little early 20s me was told that I was overqualified for this role, which was very
Mm.
nice to hear. And they directed me to customer success, because I mentioned that I liked project management and was really organized and liked dealing with customers. And I remember not even being able to tell anyone what my job title was because I had never heard of it before. But once I got there, I learned that I really loved it because it's all data analysis and creating strategic recommendations based on that data analysis. So that's definitely my favorite part about it, is getting to dig into all that information.
And at what point, so you've been around for what, 2 years, 2.5 years, would you say?
Yeah.
At
Yeah.
what point did you start to become more outspoken within the community and contributing to the community?
Yeah, I would say just in the last year, definitely when I first started in customer success, I had no idea how vast the community
Mm.
was, and how supportive and collaborative and amazing it was. So, just within the last year, I've kind of started to dig into it, started doing the CS Insider speed mixers and connecting with a lot of really cool people that are putting out a lot of really interesting content and kind of inspired me to do the same. So,
Very cool. So, you know the drill here. We're here to wrap up the biggest topics that occurred within customer success within the past week. So, let's jump into it. Are you ready?
yep.
So, I got to give a call out to a friend of the pod, the one who kicked it all off, Jan Young, and an absolute sweetheart of a woman, but she went ham on a post earlier this week about customer happiness. And I happen to agree with her. I'm going to paraphrase it very briefly. Customer success is not about making your customer happy, it's about making them successful. It may have been in that same post. She mentioned trusted advisors are for the birds. It's about being a strategic advisor because similarly, trust is just a component of the relationship, similar to happiness. Tell me your opinion on my heavily paraphrased version of Jan's post.
Yeah, I mean, she's absolutely right as usual. Jan is saying the quiet part out loud. But I think there's kind of a caveat there where customer perception to them is reality. So if they're not happy, yes, maybe we should be doing something about it. But in some cases, happiness is fleeting and business outcomes are long lasting. So if they're asking for something and we're not able to support them with that request, I think as long as we're able to kind of reroute them and help them find happiness somewhere else, so to speak, it's fair to say that we could do both. But happiness is certainly not the primary objective of a customer success department.
Very Gordon Gecko esque of you. Happiness is fleeting, but business outcomes are forever. You sound like a corporate raider. I might agree with that. I mean, I think, look, it's gravy. It's gravy if you can make the customer happy, and hopefully delivering the outcomes that they desire helps bring them to happiness. But customer happiness is kind of it's a degree removed from what it is we're actually trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a weird example that comes to mind with it is on The Office when David Wallace wants to talk to Michael about, strategic big picture things. And Michael doesn't know what that means. He gets there, he's having a good time. Maybe they both are, but they're not doing anything? So driving happiness for your customer doesn't necessarily mean driving value for them. And it's not necessarily going to translate in renewals and upsells, all that kind of stuff that we're really looking for.
This is where I have to admit, as I always do, as an Office reference is made, that I've never actually watched The Office. How does that make you feel?
Blasphemy, my goodness.
I just felt like they were never getting anywhere. I didn't see the
Interesting.
point.
Well, that's the beauty of it. It's the monotony of office life.
Mm, yeah. I also like to be fair, I've never watched all of Curb Your Enthusiasm, which I think is
Okay.
like the American like that same concept.
Well, I've never seen a single episode, so
So it's really hard to get into because the quality is like terrible in the beginning, which doesn't make
okay.
any sense because it's Larry David and he had all that Seinfeld money. You thought he could have put a little bit
Right.
more into it. Anyway, we digress. So you're a huge fan of the data, of the numbers, of understanding how all of those might affect the business outcomes, what we get out the other end from a customer success process. So I think you're going to really like this next topic, which is another friend of the pod, Sherry Srebnick's research on the impact of company value that customer success can effectuate. And so I have a quote here. It's going to melt my brain even trying to read it again. But the results, and I quote, the results indicate a clear positive relationship between a company's net recurring revenue and EV slash revenue ratio. The regression coefficient of 0.72% suggests that each percentage point increase in NRR is associated with a roughly zero point 0.7 multitude change in a company's revenue multiple. This means that for $1 billion revenue SaaS company, a mere 1% increase in NRR could translate into more than $700 million in enterprise value. Now, first of all, did you understand anything I just said?
Well, I gotta be honest, as nerdy as I am, I hear words like coefficient and I just gloss
Blank,
over a little
right?
bit. Yeah.
Well, so I
But no,
think,
I think it makes a lot of sense to me. If anything, it's maybe missing some context as to why it's even more valuable to, so to speak, farm from your customers rather than hunt for new ones, right? Because we're talking about NRR and not profitability at all.
and I have to imagine that within the actual research, which I have not read, that's probably spelled out. But the summary
Mhm.
here is meant to be the kind of like the punchline or the knockout, right? Which is that, for every percentage point increase in NRR, there's you multiply the company's revenue by about zero point 0.7. I wonder though, these numbers are so big, are they believable?
I think it's almost easier to understand it when you're looking at a startup, right? Especially if you're within that organization because you're physically seeing the difference that it makes and physically dealing with the customers every day. Versus at a larger organization, you have more CS people. Maybe you're not touching those accounts all the time, right? You don't see the growth that's actually happening. So it seems unfathomable because we have colleagues who are servicing different accounts versus having a smaller team and being able to see the big changes that are being made. But I mean, I believe it. I think it's something that has always been a cornerstone of business, that 80% of your business from 20% of your customers kind of thing. That's been a keystone of business for so long. It makes sense to me. The numbers are a lot to digest for sure, but the concept rings true, and it's interesting to see the actual numbers associated with it as well.
Yeah, I mean, there seems to be quite the conversation, and I almost wonder if Sherry is carrying the torch for customer success here in trying to beat back the commentary we're hearing about whether customer success is as valuable as we all kind of have assumed for the past 20 years.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think, now is really the time that's being called into question because of budget cuts, and of course they're looking at things that maybe they don't fully understand as cost centers when they're not having this data to bring back, even for people who maybe are having those conversations internally with their leadership about whether this department makes sense. Perhaps they haven't gotten there yet, they're not reporting those numbers, but it's a really good indication of the value that the department can bring in the future, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I do also wonder, I mean, I'd have to read more into this report, but I wonder if these figures, right, the $1 billion, 1% increase in NRR can add $700 million in enterprise value. What level of organization is being measured? Whether that information is, I'm trying to think of how best to phrase this. Where is she getting the valuation numbers from? Is it from the investors? And was that in optimistic times versus today times? Because the sort of work that Sherry does, it takes months and months to collate this information, to
Mhm.
comb through it, to organize it. Is the information that she's working off of from a time gone past where money was much cheaper? And I don't know if any of that matters. Those are questions I would have as I read through the report, probably.
Definitely, yeah, and I could see that potentially being the case, especially considering, like you said, how much work goes into all of this. That's an interesting point, definitely about how when it was calculated for sure.
We probably should have read this entire thing before we talked about it, right? I don't know if we'd have ever gotten to the conversation.
Yeah,
Anyway, Sarah,
it's definitely a lot to unpack.
and maybe we'll have to do another episode on it because I think it's interesting, right? And those are big, stark numbers that can do a lot for the CS
Mhm.
community. If they can be backed up and every one of them can be pinned down. But this next topic, this is one that you actually brought to the table, Sarah, and that I have to be completely honest with you. If I didn't understand Sherry's for the sheer science of her numbers, this one I'm having a little bit of trouble with because it's broad. It's covering a longer timeline. And at the end, there's no resolution to it. So this is a post that Nick Mehta wrote about kind of the evolution of the modern SaaS business's profitability and the current crisis it sits within. That ultimately, what he notes at the end is the reason customer success was built was to try to shore up the churn issues that show themselves with a SaaS business. So he goes through, he explains that entire thing. But at the end, he notes at scale, the on premise company at 50% operating margin is worth roughly 3 times more than the SaaS company. And this is the dilemma. How do we create sticky businesses with high margins? It's definitely possible. Some companies invest 10% of revenue and get to 95% gross revenue retention. Others can get there with a much more lean CS team. And so at the end, there is no resolution to this statement. And that makes me uncomfortable. But this is a segment I want to refer to CS 101, where I want to give you, Sarah, an opportunity to teach me about this article, what you want us to glean from this.
Yeah, so I think you've summarized it quite well, and to kind of talk about the fact that customer success, realistically, with a lot of these very complicated tech stacks, is a necessity. From my perspective, I mean, depending on the software itself, I don't know that it should be an additional cost, but it should certainly be baked into the cost of the entire package. Because if it's that complicated, customers are going to need that support or they'll never get any value and they'll simply continue to churn, right? The basis of customer success. But where I think it kind of diverges a little bit is, yes, this customer is getting value, but is our value increasing with the customer? Are we changing what the cost looks like for the customer based on their improved business outcomes? Are we saying we drove X value, so we're worth X to you? And the answer for the most part is no. And that's something that could potentially, solve for this kind of thing that Nick's mentioning in his post. It's a harder sell for customers for sure, but at the end of the day, if it's a little bit, you know, less risky, where you say you pay what we bring you, is that something that resolves this note from Nick?
I want to clarify because I think in Nick's post, he's talking about the average amount of revenue that they spend on a customer success team. And
Mm.
so I don't think the expectation is to then pass that cost on to the customer. Is that your same understanding?
Yeah. So I think as these tech stacks get complicated, the customer success team grows, right?
Mhm.
But to his point, the money we're getting from the customer isn't growing, but the value we're bringing them is, because our customer success team is more knowledgeable, is more experienced, is gaining all these additional people who can provide all this value to this customer. But that same value isn't increasing for the cost that the customer is paying. So I don't know necessarily that it's, hey, you have to pay more for customer success. But if our customer success team is driving more value for you, should you be paying more overall? Because the value you're getting from your tech stack has improved because of our contributions to our CS team.
I
I'm
think
not sure that I'm on board with that, but it's certainly one way to address it.
well, I think the way I understand it to be done as we drive value from the customer success organ, the goal is for product and or services to be continuously developing offerings that can leverage our value as expansion potential. I
Hmm.
think it's more circuitous the way in which we find that revenue versus customer success as a pro services model. It's typically a less direct revenue relationship for customer success.
Yeah, and I think customer success as its own line item is a hard sell for
Hmm.
customers because most of them don't think they need it, right? And they do, but they just think they have all the knowledge to do it themselves. So I don't know if maybe that cost should be baked into to the cost of other features or the cost of the improved value that you are seeing, right? Like, because if customers who use customer success managers are seeing improved business outcomes of 20%, should that translate to the cost? I'm not suggesting they pay for the manager because of course they never will. I'm suggesting you reported that your item that's being impacted, that's actually driving value for your organization, bringing you money, improved by 15%. Should you pay more because your CSM helped you drive that? Because you didn't do that on your own. You wouldn't have known what tools to enable on your own, right? So, should that be involved in what you're paying for a subscription fee?
I get what you're saying. Okay. I used to work for a company that did pricing optimization software, and they sold largely to big banking institutions and mostly to their consumer lending division. And the whole idea was, hey, we have a software as well as a bit of a secret sauce. You input all this data about your customer base, including the prices that were offered, the prices that were accepted versus those that were not. And we'll find you a value curve. And on one side of that curve is units, and the other side of the curve is profitability, basically. And you can click anywhere on that curve, and we can tell you exactly what price to deliver to every customer based on certain parameters or attributes about that customer. That is the optimal price. And they had a lot of trouble selling it and then explaining value on a regular basis to their customers. And I'm like, but how? Because the data, this is so scientific, it's formulaic, right?
Mm.
Let's take a look at what they did last year before they implemented, this year once they did implement. Now, granted, I do totally understand what you're saying. Like, there's a lot of stuff in there, like the market conditions and things like that. In a lot of cases, we even did control groups so that we could see very specifically, hey, this entire group, they were just offered manual pricing, didn't run through our system at all. And when I actually brought this up, value based pricing, you would have thought my head fell off the way they looked at me. They were like, uh, that would never work. And I'm like, if it would ever work, now is the perfect time.
I think it becomes more difficult depending on the business though, right? Because commerce is perhaps an easy one. There's money associated, but for other items, when you're relying on customer data to track that, did our software that helps your employees become more productive help you? I don't have that information unless they send it to me. So it becomes a little bit more difficult when it's things that live outside of the tech stack that they're leveraging.
You might assume it's part of product's job to have a rough understanding of the positive impact that your tools and services can have and price accordingly. In many cases, that's the way the pricing model has been developed in the first place. And maybe that is because if you were to say, hey, our pricing is purely based on whether you guys are successful with this. First of all, way too much risk on the
Mhm.
vendor's side. I don't think many businesses are in business for very long based on that. It also might feel a little bit too transactional for your customers. And thirdly, to your point, the pure ability for us to wrap our arms around that data, it might be very easy for your customer to fudge those numbers and be less than honest about how impactful your product or service has been for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, at the end of the day, this might just be the cost of doing business as things have become more competitive, right? Because customer success in SaaS's infancy was not what it is today. And it's sort of become an expectation, and definitely a necessity to retain customers, right? And there was not the competition that there was for softwares when it was on prem. So
When you read something like this, what do you take away from it? The way I think about stuff like this is, oh, this is a cool thing I could share with my boss, an idea for them to
absolutely.
file away and think about in the future. Another arrow in the quiver, maybe 6 months down the road, maybe it's 5 years down the road.
Hmm.
Just another angle of looking at how customer success derives value. If we're having trouble selling a service for a certain price, well, then can we break it out? You pay a very low price just all the time, but then you pay an additional price based on the success you experience. But again, have to be able to track it.
And that's the big roadblock there for sure.
I can't get data on how many times a user logs into the system in 24 hours. I don't know how I'm ever going to get data on how much faster or more efficient my product makes them based on all of the other systems it touches, all of the other workflows it touches. How could I say, hey, they have to write my software writes emails for them automatically. I hate this concept, but maybe it's an AI email generator so I don't have to write my emails anymore. And I can spend all
Mhm.
my time prospecting. I can spend all my time negotiating. There is no way to quantify the value that that gave you back.
Well, and the other thing is nothing happens in isolation, right? So you
Yeah.
had that tech stack that drove that value for you, but it's not the only tech stack you're using that's helping you improve your productivity. So I think that's the challenge is not only quantifying the value that it's bringing, but clarifying that it's only coming from that software.
If it's not the technology, it may just be the social norm of pricing in that way that folks
It's
may
the
just be
way we've
uncomfortable with.
always done it.
Yep. Here's the other thing is what if your software blew it out of the water? Like you usually charge 50 grand for it, but the value is so outsized that you really should be getting paid $1 million. And you send that customer $1 million bill. And hey, look, doesn't matter if they made 30 million based off of your tool. When they get that $1 million bill, what do you think they're going to do? Their head's going to fall off.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's another piece of it is we've been doing it that way for so long that there's an expectation that is going to be hard to overcome.
Mhm. Yeah,
Boom, mic drop.
head fall off.
I got one more for you. A third friend of the pod mentioned Marcus Wrench.
So many
I
friends.
have so many friends. he he wrote something about why QBRs suck and how to do them better. The concept is basically make it about your customer. So Sarah, this is one that you brought to the table and I want to preface this by saying I think this is really good stuff. Except, haven't we heard this before?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. It's nothing novel, but people are still doing their EBRs. Not great, right? And Marcus included a stat, I believe it was 95%, which he made up.
That's made
I
up.
don't know
Yeah,
where he's
that's
getting
made up.
it.
It's Marcus.
Completely made up, but let's say Marcus is correct in his estimation. Despite all the content to the contrary, people are still doing their EBRs like this, their QBRs like this. So I think it's still an important discussion because we're still heading into these calls that are not driving value and budgets are being cut. So it really comes down to, are you driving enough value in these EBRs to retain these customers, which might not be the case. And it's just at a point in time in the, greater landscape where churn is a realistic thing that could happen as a result of that, right? Which might not have been the case 2 years ago.
This is more of a PSA, right? This is your PSA to the community. Stop
Stop doing shit
stop
EBRs.
doing shitty EBRs. When you started in customer success, it wasn't that long ago, right? So I like to ask this question. Was this explained to you what a good EBR looks like, or did you have to discover this?
So, my first customer success role was at a startup, which in most cases means it's customer success in name, but it's really just a cluster of everything,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So, it was at a stage where we didn't have professional services, we didn't have admins, we had support, but it was one person, so did a little bit of everything.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely my early on QBRs were awful. Um, they were very much not strategic focused. They were very much what can we do tomorrow? And not even relating them back to business outcomes. And I think that's what being a part of the CS community has done for me, has really given me an understanding of what CS actually looks like, right? So, was a portion of my role to be thinking strategically? Yes, but there were so many other things to do. I didn't have the time to do that more than say 25% of the time. And so it's really been me getting into this more strategic mindset in the last 9 months in this new role, because Coveo is so, advanced, so mature compared to my previous org, where we have all these processes in place. We have all these people who've been doing customer success very much in its purest form, and understand that it's a strategic role and not just the point of contact for the customer. So I think that's something that's been a big learning curve for me, is the EBRs. So
When you started in your customer success journey and your EBR sucked, is that because you, Sarah, didn't quite understand the role that CS played yet? Slash, at that first place of employment or early on, right? We don't want to call out anybody specifically. Did you have good role models in the company you were at that you shadowed their EBRs and they were good, but it was because their perspective was refined? They'd been doing it for a while? Or was the whole company bad at business reviews?
I would say the whole company was bad at business reviews, but the customers were thirsty for strategic conversation. So they would bring things up, and I would kind of be like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to be
I'll
doing
get back
here,
to you on that.
because, yeah, I can show you how to do stuff in the admin. I could, deal with your support ticket. It was very, just reactive. And looking back, I should have been maybe an account manager and not a customer success manager, because I certainly wasn't managing anyone's success in that role. Um, but because I got to do a little bit of customer success and a little bit of professional services, a little bit of admin, I got to learn what I liked, about, being in a tech company. And I found that I did like being able to dig into the data and provide recommendations. At that point, was I tying them back to business outcomes? Was I thinking from a larger lens, and all the external factors going on in addition to our tech stack? Absolutely not.
So the other thing you called out was getting to a point where you provided value in the business review. And that piqued my interest because I consider myself to be a decent CSM. I don't know how often I'm actually providing value within a business review.
Mm,
And before anybody who my boss at the company I work for or anybody else, let me clarify what I mean by that is I don't know that the EBR or the business review is where you provide value. I consider it a fact finding mission. The way I always run it, a business review is let's assume it's not the first one. We
mhm.
review what we talked about last time. What were your strategic goals at that point? What were your pain points? What are you driving towards in this 90 days, or if it's 180 days or a year, whatever it ends up being? And then we review what it is I committed to that I thought would be able to help them drive towards that. And then at the end, we talk about what's the future look like for you. And so all we're doing is reviewing information from my perspective. And this is my experience. I want you to tell me that yours is different, or clarify what you meant when you said deliver value. Almost all the value I'm delivering is via follow up action items after the fact. It's all the stuff I do after the business review or in between business reviews. The business review is not my payoff. I think I've said this before that the business review is a place for me to go and gather more jobs to do for the customer. And those jobs should deliver value, but it doesn't typically occur within the business review itself. Tell me how my view is different than yours, if it is.
I think maybe deliver might be the incorrect word. I'll say demonstrate value, because of course, this is an opportunity where it's not just your primary points of contact. You also typically are having higher up C suite level executives in these calls, right? So it's the first time they're seeing us deliver value, and they're the ones signing the check at the end of the day, right? So being able to say, this is the value we've already driven, and this is kind of the direction that we're heading. And there's not a lot of tactical information in there, but they understand where we're going with that and the value that will be driven in the next 3, 6 months, whatever the case may be. Um, I guess delivering value on a weekly basis, whatever it may be, to the primary points of contact is a little bit more tactical in that you're helping them action those items, but the plan is fairly fleshed out from a high level perspective in the EBR, where you say this is the value we've driven and this is where we're driving to get more.
Then we agree. Crisis averted. Okay, Sarah, you seem like a perfectly nice person. I don't want to
I don't like where this is going.
I don't want to put you in a box, but you are from Canada, and we all know
Mm,
what everybody thinks about Canadians.
yes.
Nicest people
Yeah.
on earth. But I think you might have a little bit of edge in you. And so I'd like to give you an opportunity to bring that out in a segment we refer to as BS in CS.
Biggest load of crap I've ever heard.
Number one bullshit. Oh, number one bullshit.
Sarah, if you had to choose one, what is the trend, catchphrase, or otherwise related to customer success that you would like to see done away with forever?
Ooh, just one. I'm having a kind of a competing thing in my brain with two that have been really bothering me in the past few weeks. I'm gonna go with churn because I think the NPS slander has been well
It
documented and
has
we don't need
been.
to rehash it. So, um,
Honorable mention, though.
yeah,
That sounds like an honorable
yeah.
mention.
Second place prize. But yeah, I would say churn and kind of the, idea we have of churn as an explicitly bad concept. I think that some churn is necessary, and in some cases, it's better for the organization. I think that CS maybe hasn't matured to the point where we are all tracking information that will indicate to us if this churn is good for the organization or not.
I've been thinking of this new segment name, Churn It Up, which is
Love it.
examples of customers you want to fire. And so that
Yes.
dovetails nicely into what you were just saying. So, would you like to give us an example in our inaugural segment of Churn It Up of a customer that
Mhm.
you would like to fire?
Interesting. Interesting. I am gonna go with a customer from a previous org.
Of course, you have to, right?
Have to, obviously. I think the issue was the culture, the context we were working with, but they had zero ability to think strategically. No matter how much we tried to reroute them to strategic thinking, they were always so caught up in the day to day. And much to Jan's points earlier about, keeping the customer happy, this customer was never happy despite us doing everything to try and keep them happy. Now, they were such a large account that if they said jump, we said which bridge,
Hmm. Yeah,
which
because
really
that's how you fight.
impacted. Yeah, I mean, thank you so much. I'll go jump off now.
Yeah.
It was impacting our organization from a product perspective, from a morale perspective, because of course this customer would last minute drop things on us and we would just have to do it because they constantly were threatening to leave. It was an abusive relationship. They were demanding certain things of the product, demanding certain things of our customer success team, and it just got to the point where it was, adversely impacting everyone involved. And we were trying to mature a product in a certain direction. And they, of course, were caught up on things like, this button should be blue, right?
Hmm.
So it's not driving value, but getting them to really understand that that's what we're here for, is to drive value, was very difficult.
I like that one. I think that's kind of like the totem of the bad product market fit customer,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. I think I and don't like to place blame on anyone, but for this,
Sales.
it was partly sales. Yeah, because they're selling a roadmap and not a product.
Oh,
And of course, the customers are not thrilled when they get there and they've been catfished by sales. So,
at that organization or any organization, are your sales folks incentivized with retention bonuses? So even if they're not actively involved beyond the signature, are they bonused a year later when that customer renews? Anything like that?
yeah, so at every organization that I've been at, yep, they've been involved in retention. So this is
Hmm.
the other thing is that sales doesn't think like CS thinks. So I'm saying we're not changing the button to blue because it doesn't drive value. And, we'll have to have another call with them to explain why it doesn't drive value and suggest alternatives and understand what they really need, right?
Mm-hmm.
But sales wants their retention bonus. So they're pushing to do whatever the customer would like to do. So it's almost, not even almost, it's competing priorities within the organization. We're not working towards one common goal.
That's interesting that they even gum up the works with retention. I never thought of it that way. Man, sales is the worst. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. We love you, salespeople. It is such a delicate dance. I certainly don't envy them, but mm, man, that's a rock and a hard place.
I mean, it definitely is. And it's not a good experience for anyone involved, of course, right? The customer's escalating to me, to sales. Sales is going back and forth between me and the customer and vice versa.
It's
Yeah,
crazy
so
how
fired.
universal it's crazy how universal that experience is. I literally had that exact same conversation earlier this week about how do we drive more accountability for the conversations and the commitments that are given to a customer in the pre-sales conversations, and how, look, not even, we're not trying to fire anybody over it, but how do we know what expectations have been set for the customer?
Mhm. Well, that's the other thing too. In a proactive role, I'm not able to be proactive because I don't even have visibility
Mm,
on I can see that these features are being delayed, but I don't know that that's impacting my customer because I didn't even know they knew about them.
yeah, I don't know the answer. Sarah, this has been a lot of fun. We only have a few minutes left, so I do want to wrap things up. Let's move on to our conclusion. And the first part of our conclusion is always giving big ups to somebody else in the community after we tear everybody down for the majority of the show. Let's give somebody our tiny little plastic medal called CS Player of the Week. Who out there is moving the customer success profession forward in the past 7 days in your eyes, Sarah? Who do you want to give a shout out to?
This person is someone who was one of the first people that I connected with, followed when I was first, learning about the CS space. And she took a little bit of a break, but is back with a vengeance. So I'm gonna give the little plaque to Ashna Patel. She has been, very transparent about her break for her own well-being, and I really love that we're kind of blending that CS discussion with employee wellness and taking care of yourself, especially in roles that are customer facing. And I'm very excited that the book club is back that she hosts.
The book club. I think customer facing roles can be such high pressure situations. They never turn off. I personally am very aware of my own like tenseness in my tension within my body when things aren't going well at work, based on the number of slacks I'm getting, the number of texts after hours that I'm getting. If ever there were a position that needs to be more aware of their mental health, maybe the C suite
Mhm.
in a really bad market, but otherwise, customer success is right up there. And I would encourage
Definitely.
everybody to do what you can to be more aware of those signals.
And might I suggest Catalyst's specifically customer success themed meditation playlist? I don't know if you've had a chance to check that out.
I have not.
It's very validating for them to say, "Stop thinking about your emails."
Wait, they
And
say that
it
in the playlist?
resonates. They say things like that, and I'm like, "Yes, I should stop thinking about my
But in
emails."
saying that, do you think about them?
Not particularly. It just reminds me to extract that from my brain.
Maybe it's justification, right? Like, hey, it's okay. It's okay to do that.
Mhm.
Like, we're all going through that. It's okay to turn it off every once in a while. I go through fits and spurts where I'll just delete every work related app off of my phone so that if I'm not in front of my
Yes.
computer, I cannot, I literally cannot be distracted by it.
Yes. I mean, holiday Monday, I looked at my phone and I went, "Wow, no emails today." I had turned my notifications off for my email. There were in fact emails.
You outsmarted future you.
Yes, she looks out for me sometimes, past Sarah.
Okay. Referrals and recommendations. If you could take the audience members and offer them one piece of advice of something to check out, it's a book, TV show, maybe an activity like a volunteering sort of thing you're passionate about, what would it be?
I am a big reader, and so I'm definitely going to recommend a book, one that has been talked about a lot on Book Talk. I don't know if you're ever there, but
Wait, book talk?
the
TikTok's
yes.
okay. No, I haven't.
I mean, it's not a separate app or
No, I
anything.
know.
It's just,
My wife talks
okay.
about witch talk and plant talk, and now it's baby
Yes.
talk because of our new baby. I didn't. I was just making sure it wasn't book talk. You said
Oh,
book talk.
yes.
Got it.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, so probably top 5 that I read last year, but definitely well worth the hype is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Waiting on the movie adaptation, not announced, but I know it's coming.
Is that more of a lady book, or will men enjoy that too?
I think men will enjoy that too. I have a couple male friends who have read it and have enjoyed it. It's more of a slow burn, but yeah, it's a nice
Got it.
book.
Okay. Sarah, where can folks connect with you?
Can connect with me on LinkedIn. It is Sara LeBlanc, spelled with no rules of spelling. So check out the show notes.
Exactly. And how about Coveo? Where can folks learn about them?
Yeah, you can check out the Coveo website. We also are hosting Relevance 360 at the end of March, which is kind of like our annual event, just a virtual event where you can learn all things Coveo, and then there's specific calls about the different lines of businesses as well if you'd like to learn more about what we do.
Cool. Thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, nice to chat.
You've been listening to Lifetime Value, the podcast for customer success professionals. If you like what you've heard, please rate our show and subscribe wherever you find your podcast. Please note that the views expressed in these conversations are attributed only to those individuals on this podcast and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of their respective employers. For all inquiries, please reach out via email to dillon@lifetimevaluepodcast.com. Find us on YouTube via our channel, Lifetime Value, and find us on the socials at Lifetime Value Podcast. Until next time.
I'm going to go get some pizza.